what's funny? As humans, we're always trying to answer that question, what's next? We get to sixth grade and we say, what's next for me in junior high? Will I learn how to change classrooms quickly and not accidentally walk into the wrong room? When we get to eighth grade, we say, what's next for me when I get to high school? Are people gonna like me? Will I need to actually start studying? When we get to 12th grade, we say, what's next for me when I graduate? What will my major be? What school will I go to? What job do I want to do for the rest of my life? Or if you're like me, after lunch today, I thought, what's next for dinner? These are all important questions, don't get me wrong, but I think we've neglected to answer one of the most important what's next questions. I'll never forget accepting Jesus into my heart when I was in 7th grade at a summer camp. It was genuinely life-changing for me to know I was forgiven and loved by God. To be transparent with you though, it wasn't until a few years after that life-changing moment for me that I asked, what's next for my faith? I committed my life to Jesus and knew that he loved me and that I was going to heaven, but I didn't take initiative to be like him. You know what's funny? We hear that phrase, be like Jesus, kind of a lot here at church, but I'm not certain we really know who Jesus is. How can we possibly be like someone if we don't really know who they are? So today, my hope is that we can answer 2 questions. First, what kind of person was Jesus? And second, how can we practically take our what's next step in our faith by being more like him? To answer who Jesus was, let's look at one of the most well-known stories in the Bible of Jesus modeling love and humility for his disciples. This story takes place on a night that was like any other night to the disciples, but to Jesus, this was the last night he was going to be with them before he was crucified. On his last night, this story tells us how Jesus chose to spend his time. In the Bible, in John chapter 13, verse 5, we read, Jesus poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. On this last night of Jesus' life, he chose to wash his disciples' feet. That's kind of weird, right? I don't know about you, but if it were me, I would have wanted to throw a party or something and hang with all of my closest friends. But Jesus chooses to serve his disciples. At this time in history, it would have been outrageous for Jesus, their Messiah and Rabbi, to be washing their feet. Hear me out. You think feet are gross now? Back then, they didn't wear sneakers or closed-toed shoes. They didn't have modern plumbing systems. So their nasty toes were squishing in some pretty gross stuff, if you know what I mean. Traditionally, people's feet were washed as they'd entered into a home by a servant. To compare what Jesus is choosing to do for his disciples, it would kind of be like your friend just randomly showing up to your house, doing all of your grossest chores for you, and then literally expecting nothing in return. Like cleaning your dirty toilet, or picking up after your dog in the backyard, or taking out the nasty smelling trash in your house. Jesus took on the role of a servant to teach his disciples the importance of serving one another. This is only one story out of a substantial amount of stories in the Bible that show Jesus as being humble and choosing to serve others. But from it, we learn one primary characteristic that helps us to identify specifically how we can become more like him. We need to serve others in humility. So, how do we serve others? Remember, I mentioned that my faith didn't grow right away when I first started following Jesus. It's because I didn't answer that what's next question for myself. My guess is that I'm not alone. If you're here today and you're feeling like your faith is kind of stuck, or that your life hasn't changed as much as you were expecting when you got back from camp, here's my advice. Really, I'd argue that it's Jesus' advice to all of us. Here it is. Start serving others. That's it. That's the answer to one of the most important what's next questions you can ask. If I could go back and tell my junior high or high school self one thing to ignite a consistent and life-changing relationship with God, it would be to start serving others. You might be thinking, Jimmy, I want to serve, but I really don't know if my faith is strong enough yet. But to be honest with you, that's kind of the point. When you jump into serving, you start to grow and become more like Jesus. You don't believe me? After this, ask your coach if they had it all figured out when they first started coaching and just see what they say. Or maybe if that's not it, for you, your barrier for starting to serve isn't because you don't feel like you're ready, but maybe a more practical reason you haven't started. Maybe you just don't know the areas that you can serve here at church. Well, thanks for asking. Here's a few. You could serve at the coffee shop. You could make some food at the grill or take people's orders at the grill. You could be on the hype squad and welcome kids to church. You could be a coach and serve little kids and teach them about Jesus. You could volunteer in junior high. You could play an instrument on the worship team, production behind the scenes, and literally so many more options. If you want to start serving, we have a place for you. As we start to wrap up, there's probably a group of you that are thinking, this service has kind of been a waste of my time, because if you're being honest, you're like already serving, which if you are, that is awesome. We're actually going to hear from one of you after this video is over, but don't think you guys are off the hook quite yet. If you're already been serving on the weekends, my challenge for you would be to continue to ask that what's next question when it comes to serving. Maybe instead of serving for only one service on the weekends, you could start serving for two. Or maybe instead of serving only on the weekends here at church, serving needs to become a lifestyle for you throughout your entire week. Friends, saying yes to serving was one of the best decisions that I ever made, and I'm confident that whether you are currently serving somewhere and need to take another step deepening that commitment, or you haven't quite started yet, it could be one of the best decisions you ever make. And so what's next for you? My hope is that you'll choose to be like Jesus by serving others.